Hey guys, just wanted to jump on here really quick. I've had a lot of people reach out to me in terms of how they can support what I'm doing. I am doing this full time now, and if you'd like to contribute, if you like and value the work that I'm doing and like to contribute, on every single episode, I have a title "Support My Work." Underneath it, there's a Venmo, Locals, Cash App, or if you prefer not to use one of those methods, you can mail a check or money order to PO Box 25383, Scottsdale, Arizona 85255 9998. So, again, thank you for all the support. Appreciate it and look forward to more conversations ahead. Dr. Parks, it's good to see you again. I'm going to tell the story. I'm going to share it for people listening, even though we just kind of hashed through it. The whole thing started with you and I. We spoke, first time you were on here was October of 21. And then summer of 22, we got to meet in person and record. And it all stemmed from the first medical person I ever had on here was Ryan Cole. And the funny thing about it was Ryan, Dr. Cole was saying, dropping names during the conversation. And I'm writing it down and I'm like, and it's like Dr. Parks and, Dr. Jessica Rose. And I'm like, oh, this is great. And then I started like venturing, it was like collecting baseball cards. I was a card collector when I was a kid. I'm like, oh, I gotta get the scientists.
Oh my gosh, somebody should spearhead like this collection of cards for all of these medical freedom people that spoke out during COVID. And like you could, that's such a great idea. That is so fun.
Well, and then Lynn Finn, when I told her that, so once in a while on X, I'll say there'll be a picture of them that she'll post. And I'm like, look at all those cards. Like, I've had all those cards on my show. But then I would go down the path, people would name drop other people. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, there's more cards to go out there and collect. Like,
And I feel the same way, constantly connecting to different people and different practitioners. It's just a continual learning journey because everybody has something to offer. It's just a matter of time, right? And
well, and also though, when did your story start to blow up? Like, what was the
so
initiator for
I was
that?
speaking out from the spring of 2021. I started doing speaking locally, but I was super censored on YouTube, on Facebook. So even though I was speaking out at all of these different rallies and people were posting it, they were getting their accounts taken down. And then in August 19th of 2021, I spoke at the Michigan House and I did a testimony there. And it was supposed to be like 4 minutes. I think mine ended up being six. So it was super short, sweet, to the point, and a lot of scientific content. And it's really crazy because a homeschooling mom friend of mine, who I had helped her with her son's health, actually watched the entire 4 hour event, like the testimony, clipped my little segment of it, uploaded it to YouTube without my name on it, and it went viral. And in 2 weeks, it had millions of views. And so that's when people knew who I was and started contacting me. And actually, people looked up, I was teaching at a homeschool co op. They looked up my information that was on the homeschool co op page for my students and took my email and started contacting me that way. I was kind of freaked out by it, honestly.
Yeah, was that the video where you said we don't want your fucking shots? Was that one?
No,
That was a
that was
different
when
one,
the
right?
HIPAA mandates in January of 2022 at the same time of the Ron Johnson hearing. So that was on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. This one was you can see that it's in a courtroom, and I basically come and or in the legislature, and you can see that I come and I start testifying. And I said, does the COVID vaccine prevent transmission? No. Does flu vaccine prevent transmission? No. Does DTaP prevent transmission? So, and I ended with, are you going to keep 70% of African Americans out of the workplace? Because I went over the historical experimentation on Black people, the Tuskegee experiments, and of course there's many more, the MMR. So that video actually went super viral, and it's still, like, when it's posted, it goes viral again. For whatever reason, people just love that video. But after that, people started contacting me, and God just kind of opened doors. It was a lot of different things happen. Mhm.
It's a blessing and a curse with the digital age that we're in. But I have to think, with something like that, just goes and millions of people are watching it. It's so bizarre, right? Just weird.
Well, yeah, they think that you're somebody. Like, somebody called me one time. I was in TJ Maxx with my daughter, And, it ended up being a call I wanted to pursue, but they're like, you actually answer your own phone? I'm like, yeah, I clean my own toilet too. Like, I don't like, just because you see a video of me doesn't mean my life has really changed that much, and I'm sure you relate to that, you know, uh, so I'd like, not living in a mansion, don't have, a cleaning person or anything like that. Just trying to muddle through and do what needs to be done.
No, I'm definitely not one of the cool kids. Please don't put me in the category with all you guys. So I'm not one of the cards. I'm not one of the cool kids. So for people that might not be familiar with you, if you don't mind going into your background and just letting people know who you are.
I got an undergraduate degree in biochemistry and molecular biology from the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire, and then I went on to University of Michigan and got a PhD in cellular and molecular biology in the Department of Immunology and Physiology. So I'm really poised, and I actually was surprised at some of the things that was being done on the childhood vaccine schedule when I was in graduate school. And so when I got out of science because it was draining my soul. I think we talked about this before. And I went into teaching and I saw such neurological injury. And the CDC was saying we have no evidence that vaccines cause autism. Well, in science, what you say is really important, how you say it. I mean, and I was like, yeah, that means they haven't looked, right? This is just avoiding the question. They're implying that they've looked and found nothing, but the truth is they won't look. So I was very skeptical of changes I saw to the vaccine schedule. And so I started watching it. And eventually I decided I had to get involved. And parents started coming to me asking me, how was my child injured? Like by things like the MMR. And my own innate curiosity had me sort of digging through root causes. So when COVID happened, I was already kind of in that space. And I was like, what are they going to bring out now? So we were waiting to see what these new vaccines would be. And when before the public happened, we got wind that it was, they showed the platforms, and I'm like, that's experimental gene therapy. Like I was just like right off the gate, I'm like, oh my God, like this is so unsafe. And so I started speaking out wherever I could. But I was super censored. And I think it's because of my degree and my credibility. Molecular biology is the degree that you would have in order to create this type of technology. And so we were extremely well trained in it and extremely actually well trained in the cost and benefits of it and the ethical problems with it back in the day. And now they seem to have disbanded any committees that are looking into the ethical and scientific issues with it so that they could push it forward and make a buck.
Were people listening to you? What right? I mean, when you said, "Wait a minute,"
Absolutely. So the first time I spoke, they gave me a 20-minute slot at a church that was talking about a lot of these different freedom issues or whatever. Someone asked me to speak, and I talked about uh, basically she's in Lee's work, who was the bat lady who was doing work on her and Richard Barrick have been doing work on these coronaviruses for 10 to 20 years. And I showed that this had to be, from a lab and all these other things. And when I finished, there was just dead silence. And then everybody rose to their feet and gave me a standing ovation. And it wasn't because like I'm such a great presenter, it was because they all knew there was something very wrong here. And I had just explained it so elegantly, all of the different steps, all of it was sort of hidden in plain sight. You just had to know where to look. And so then as information came out like on hydroxychloroquine, which, had such a history of research as a broad spectrum antiviral, which of course Fauci knew, all of these things, like somebody would invite me to speak, I remember, and I'd be like, I haven't seen anything posted on this. I haven't seen no public relations on this. So like there's gonna be nobody there. I'd walk in, there'd be 300 people or 500 people. And they'd be like, okay, this is a clandestine meeting and everybody, you have to leave your cell phone in your car. And like, I was just like, who are these people? What is this organization that I'm speaking for? And it was all of these concerned citizens that might be judges or lawyers that didn't want to be associated with being anti-establishment or anti-vaccine, but really wanted information and wanted to know what was going on. So, I would speak, and one of the biggest things that I would speak on the COVID vaccine and on hydroxychloroquine, on COVID, all of the, lab origins, all of these different things as information came out. And invariably, people would come up to me, especially after I started speaking on the vaccine, and say, what did I do to my children? because if you can't trust the government on one thing, you certainly can't trust them on another.
How did it make you feel that you were getting such a response at that? I can't believe that COVID was almost 5 years ago now.
Honestly, it's interesting because I was thinking about that now because I've launched a website, vi-ta.org, vi-ta.org, Vita. Um, and I think we always feel like we're not getting far enough. And in my case, it wasn't looking for professional gain. I don't like, I would have stayed in science if I wanted to be this big, important person or whatever. It was getting the word out. And so even though I was speaking to relatively large audiences locally, I could not sort of break out. I was so censored. And knowing that this vaccine was coming and how basically deadly it was going to be from the very first, I was like, COVID is not the weapon. Maybe this is, at first I thought it was biological warfare from the Chinese. Then when they destroyed hydroxychloroquine, I was like, oh my God, our own government wants to scare us and kill millions of people. Um, and I was like, this vaccine is the weapon. You can control who gets it. And all four of them were using the full length spike protein, which we know is like absolutely toxic. And of course, those studies have just shown how toxic it is. It just gets more and more toxic, more studies that come out. And so I was grieving, actually grieving when they destroyed hydroxychloroquine, when they started promoting this vaccine, because I knew that that they were going to allow millions of people to die so that they could scare people to promote the vaccine, and that the vaccine itself was going to kill millions of people, either in the short term or in the long term via chronic disease and inflammation. And so I was speaking out as much as I could. And I remember thinking, God, why don't you let me have a bigger platform so that I can let more people know? And even now, the toll that it's take just grieves my soul because it's obviously so completely unnecessary, right? And I was one of the few people who really understood what was happening and understands what's happening now and could not stop the train wreck, unable to stop the train wreck. All I could do was continue to speak out. So, I was always very grateful for when I did have a platform, but I continued and even continue now to grieve um, that there isn't a widespread understanding of how dangerous this technology is, and which of course gets us into my most recent video where I talk about how our biggest fears about this technology are coming true.
Well,
And
and
then that one just hit, 200,000 views.
well, what I was going to add to that is, that whole experience, that the gene therapy and the death jab, as some people refer to it, is, it made me realize the federal government, they hate me.
I'm sorry,
The
you
federal
broke.
government hates me. They absolutely hate me after putting people
Really?
through that. I mean, for mandating this on people and forcing
Uh-huh.
people to get these shots back then.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a level of incompetence and stupidity that we are really vastly underestimating. When I listen to people who even are still against the establishment, they really do not understand how dangerous this is, right? They still have this, they can't believe something this bad would actually happen. And so I don't know if it's cognitive dissonance or not really just understanding the science or just not having the time to listen to it. They really still don't understand how dangerous this technology is.
So you posted your video the other day, and well, I don't want to butcher it. I'm not going to be able to tell the story as good as you are. So, but talk about what you shared in that, and the findings, and where we're at, where you've discussed where we were then and where we're at now with all this.
Yeah, and it's difficult because it's complex molecular biology that I have to kind of walk people through one step at a time when, I spent 12 years studying
Let,
it, right?
let me interrupt you because I always think of the movie Philadelphia. Did you ever see that movie with Denzel Washington?
A long time ago.
Well, he uses a line in there, explain things to me like I'm 5 years old. So do me a favor, Dr. Parks. My audience is probably a lot smarter than I am. Explain things to me like
I'll
I'm five
try,
years old.
but I don't think I can dumb it down quite that much, but
Okay,
I'll
7 years
try.
old. 7 years old.
And that's the thing, like, and we were talking about Kevin McKernan. So this started with Kevin McKernan's work, and he's amazing. And I had him on my Vita website Alliance. And after that, one of the doctors pulled me aside and said, you were the only one who understood what he was saying. He's a gene jockey and he doesn't want to overstate things. So he talks in technical language. And he's gotten much, much better at making it accessible to the layperson. Almost all of us have. Um, but but in order to do that, sometimes the language that you use, like he doesn't want to use language that might be considered inflammatory or like you're trying to make something out of nothing. But in order for you guys to understand it, I have to use language that you're like, you get it. Because as a molecular biologist, I make all the connections instantly, and the average person doesn't see any of it. So let me try to walk you through this. First of all, these dangers are inherent to the technology. That said, it's really interesting to me that in Kevin McKernan's work, he found that Moderna, who Fauci, I believe, my understanding is he had stock in, um, these problems weren't inherent to the Moderna vaccine. They make sure to fix them. They could have been there, but they were like, let's check and make sure this doesn't happen with Moderna. Now, not that Moderna is great. It had a high adverse event rate, but it didn't have these issues that I'm going to go into. Pfizer, apparently, according to Kevin McKernan, boasted that they used a gene therapy vector in order to make this vaccine. So let me back up. The vaccine was mRNA enclosed in fat so that it could take it and it would take it to all the different cells of your body, even though they told us that wasn't true. It was true. And they said that RNA can't get into your DNA because only DNA can pop into your DNA. And we said, well, that's not always true. It can sometimes be recopied into DNA and pop in, but it's going to be at a low level. So, okay, whatever, maybe not the biggest threat, right? This is very inflammatory technology, so that's a bigger threat. However, they went on and on and on about this being RNA and not DNA. And so by happenstance, for another reason, totally, Kevin actually sequenced what was in the DNA vial from, the vaccine vial from Pfizer. And what he found was not only was the RNA there, but there was as much DNA in there as there was RNA. And the DNA was from the manufacturing process. Now, the first manufacturing process for the trials, the first people to get the vaccine, was totally different. But when they scaled it up, in order to make that much mRNA, they had to use something called a plasmid. So it's a small circular piece of DNA that is the workhouse of molecular biology. We've all used them. And what they do is they take this plasmid and they put the gene, in this case, the DNA coding for the spike protein in there, and they have some other elements to make sure that bacteria copy it and make lots of it. And it goes right into bacteria. They grow the bacteria in a big vat, and they make a ton of this DNA. They purify it, and then they use enzymes to make the mRNA from that DNA. So if they didn't purify it, one, you could have bacterial cell membrane in your vaccine, which is extremely inflammatory. And clearly they didn't purify it because a bunch of this plasmid DNA was still in there. Now, this is problematic for a lot of reasons. They knew that it was still in there because they tried to use enzymes to cut it up. Some of it was cut up, but it can still get into your cells. In fact, it's likely to get into your blood cells, insert into your DNA, and cause mutations. All this DNA, it's going to pop right into your DNA, no problem. But some of the DNA, was my concern, some of the DNA, the circular DNA coding for the spike protein, can replicate in bacteria, likes to be in bacteria, likes to replicate in bacteria. So in some of the vaccinated, or even the people working with the vaccine, these bacterial plasmids may have gotten into their bacteria, in their gut, in their nose, in their throat, and started making copies of themselves and started making the spike protein. So there was a chance that it could not only make more copies of the plasmid and spread it among the general populace, because we all spread bacteria with each other,
Is
but
that through,
that
Dr. Parks, let me interrupt
bacteria,
you. Could the bacteria, could that spread through like sweating? Like if I'm in a yoga class with somebody next to me who's
no,
vaccinated?
just breathing. You just scratch your face, you touch your nose, you touch something, just like you would, spread pneumonia or anything else. So, because you have gut bacteria, you have bacteria in your nose and throat, and we spread those to people all day, every day. Most of our bacteria aren't pathogenic, they're just normal gut bacteria, so it's not really a problem. But these gut bacteria can contain now this plasmid that could potentially make the spike protein. Now, in Moderna's case, it can only work in bacteria and only under certain conditions. So the likelihood that it's producing the spike protein is quite low. In Pfizer, I'm just going to say it, it's a fucking shit show. It's just a fucking shit show. So in Pfizer, not only can these plasmids replicate in bacteria, they took them from their gene therapy department. And these plasmids in their gene therapy department were developed to replicate and produce in human cells. So in the Pfizer vaccine, it was contaminated with plasmid that was designed to replicate heavily and express the protein in human cells. So if you got a bacteria with this plasmid from the Pfizer vaccine in your gut and it's replicating in your gut, that plasmid is actually localized to your human cells. So your human cells are going to take up that plasmid. The SV40 promoter actually will localize it to the nucleus. It will make many copies in your cell, and it will produce the spike protein in your cell. They're optimized for producing proteins, for replicating and producing proteins in human cells. So this was a theoretical possibility, and we knew it, and it could be spread among the general populace. So they've just created a self-replicating infectious agent that produces the toxic spike protein that can infect all of our guts. And they've shown that when the cells produce the spike protein, they put them in these little fat globules and send them all over the body. So your gut cells could be producing the spike protein and sending it all over the body. Also, we know that the production of the spike hinders your tumor suppressor genes. It basically fuels cancer in many different mechanisms. And so they took a biopsy of this gentleman who had 4 Pfizer vaccines, and he developed a turbo cancer in his colon. And when he went in, they biopsied it, and then 30 days later, he died of the colon cancer, and they biopsied again. Kevin McKernan got this material, and they were studying whether these plasmids were in them. And when they sequenced them, they found a considerable amount of plasmid DNA. And they showed that the plasmids that were in them were replicating to the number of 100 per cell. So they were going crazy, making more and more plasmid and potentially making the spike protein. And this was found in the turbo cancer cell. So the question is, how many people in our populace have bacteria or gut cells infected? I'm going to transfect would be the technical term, but for our lay people, I'm going to say infected with this plasmid that's coding for the spike protein and potentially producing the spike protein in them. I think nobody's really looked to see, like they looked at, and so this initial study, which is unpublished as of now, is proof of concept that this fear that we had that these plasmids are getting out and becoming basically self-replicating infectious agents is warranted. And like, how do you stop that? It doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not, because we all share bacteria. So this is going to affect the vaccinated and the unvaccinated alike. And it's going to be, mostly in our nose and throat and in our gut, can be affected with bacteria that has the plasmid, but then the plasmid, the Pfizer one, can transfer to our cells and our epithelial and start making spike protein that is going to drive cancer.
Are you following what's going on in Japan with Professor Murakami and the self-replicating mRNA?
I'd have to look at it. I'm familiar with the technology to know a lot of these different potential downsides, but you're going to have to go through it because, I kind of look at it and.
Well, the only reason I asked that, I had him on a few months ago, and they were doing the trials at that point, and it was a company ironically out of San Diego, the pharmaceutical company that was spearheading it in Japan. So when I had first, gotten familiarized with the term self-replicating mRNA, that was the first I'd heard of it, and I thought, okay, so maybe the plan is, for whatever reason, they start with Japan as the guinea pig, and then it expands out, or if those people are traveling, it's just going to spread. But what you're saying is, if I'm understanding this correctly, the self-replicating is already here. It was always
right.
here.
I actually pulled the papers where they were looking at using plasmids as a form of vaccination in this same way. And the thing is, it would not just vaccinate like the person you gave it to, it would now spread. It would be a passive form of vaccination to vaccinate the whole, everybody, because we're going to spread it amongst each other. Right, this plasmid. That's the thing. There's really no way of stopping it. right? And there are antibiotic resistance genes in these plasmids. So they're going to make people's guts and gut bacteria resistant to antibiotics. And they're coding for the spike protein. So how do you get rid of these? It's crazy.
Uh,
It's a really bad sci-fi novel, because this is really going to fuel cancer. And the question is, we just don't know how many people have this. And so I'm a very big proponent of really looking at your gut health. Like we should all have access to ivermectin to stop the subclinical COVID infections in the gut and the spike protein production in the gut. There are other things. There are binders that can kind of take some of these plasmids out. There are ways of killing the bacteria, binding the plasmid. It's actually super complicated. I think Dr. Robin Rose is a leader in the field of dealing with this spike toxicity and the various forms that it has. But it's really complicated because if you destroy cells with a spike protein, that spike protein is extremely inflammatory and it just goes to other cells and sets up the same problem, right? And it can cause, anaphylaxis and just hyperinflammation, sepsis, if you like take an antibiotic and kill all these bacteria in your gut that have produced the spike protein and liberate the spike protein, it causes all sorts of problems. So it has to be done in a staged way, but most of us don't have huge problems, right? Or we would know. Like if you're really sick, then you know you got a huge problem. But like in terms of, I know there's compounds in like bladderwrack that called fucoidan that can kind of bind the virus in the gut, that can bind the spike protein in the gut, that can help heal the lining of the gut and the blood vessels that line the gut. So there are, and that's why on my website I have key elements of spike detox protocols. So you know what are things that you can do and it's really specifically for just the everyday average person. What can you do to mediate these risks? Because people think this is done, and it's really only beginning in terms of the chronic disease and the death that we're going to see.
what were your thoughts when first discovering what Kevin McKernan was revealing? And have you spoken to him? Are you guys?
Yeah, well, yes, and he came on to my
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Vaccine Injury Teaching Alliance and explained everything in detail. And this was at the beginning when he had just identified the plasmid. Um, I was not surprised at all because this was the kind of risk that I knew was inherent to this technology. And everybody else was acting like it's some one-off. And I'm like, no, these are risks inherent to this technology that should have been checked for. And when I was at the Ron Johnson hearings, I ended up getting into it. With uh, the scientist who pioneered this mRNA technology. I don't know why I'm forgetting his name.
Dr.
He's
Malone?
white hair and with a mustache.
Dr. Malone?
Yes, yeah, Robert Malone. I knew it was an R. Okay. I don't know why I just mind blanked on that. I ended up getting into it with Robert Malone because we were talking about some other risk involving these untranslated reasons, really complicated molecular biology, but it's like when he was with a molecular biology, he knows I know. He knows David Weissman knows the risk of these technologies, and he wanted to downplay it. I think because he still has many business partners that are promoting this technology. And there are very few people that, like, even if you talk about the head of NIH, well, Fauci knew, Francis Collins knew, they know. Um, but the FDA and a lot of these different governmental agencies that rubber stamped all of this, they do not understand the risk involved. That's why we had different committees to make sure this kind of thing never happened. This type of technology should never, never, never have been used on a large scale. So I was not surprised at all. Um, I was gratified that someone was actually doing the work to show whether or not this is happening. And I'm gratified that the work is ongoing to show how much of a threat it is. I will actually be thrilled if we test the population and find out people do not have these plasmids in their gut, right? That would thrill me. Um, but nobody's looking. And so we don't know how far a potential threat is progressing in the absence of anybody testing to detect, like what if 80% of us have these plasmids in our gut that are causing cancer, right? How far along is that cancer going to progress and what are the risk factors for it, before we do anything? And even worse, if you're 70, that's one thing. But are these in our children? Is it predisposing them to cancer at much earlier ages? Right? We know the boys were getting myocarditis, and there's so many risks of this technology. Everyone's inflammatory. When I talked to a midwife, and she said one woman didn't take the vaccine, but she's been exposed to people who are vaccinated. After the birth, she would not stop bleeding. The thing is, everything else was normal. So this wasn't a case where they couldn't figure out why she was bleeding, but she was. And so she says, we keep seeing all of this, all of these aberrations in birth, all of these miscarriages in the vaccinated, but even the unvaccinated people are inflammatory and having more and more complications during birth. And so the practitioners are telling me when they do people's blood work, everybody's inflammatory. Everybody's having issues, no matter how healthy they think they are. So, um, and Robin Rose, who does people with post-COVID syndrome, people who have just had COVID, they've shown neurological injury, lesions on the brain just after having COVID. The spike protein is a bioweapon. It's extremely deleterious. And so it's something that everyone's just like, oh, moving on. And no, we're not moving on. And when I talk to people, because people come up to me, it's not unlikely that people tell me between 2 and 5 of their relatives in their immediate family, like their, aunts, uncles, mom, dad, have died within the last 2 years of cancer, of stroke, heart attack, all of these, vaccine related. And so we never seen death like that. And everybody's just sort of ignoring it. And again, it's one thing for a 70-year-old to die, but what impact is this going to have on our kids? And so my message is the risks have not gone away. They're still very much here. And we need to be extremely proactive about our health, because with your health, there's like a threshold beyond which your body just sort of devolves into a hot mess. And if you catch it before that, your body can really do a lot to recover itself. But if you let it get beyond that threshold, recovering your health is extremely, extremely challenging. So it's very hard to get that message out. It's not a message people obviously want to hear. And I, don't want to be the harbinger of a zombie apocalypse, but like, there it is.
Yeah, and I had Dr. William Mackis on yesterday, and he was also in Phoenix when Kevin McKernan was here a few weeks ago, and we were talking about Kevin's work, and 'cause I told him that I was having you on today, and and you think like there's an Overton window to be able to talk about this stuff right now. Like I maybe I was naive prior, but obviously not, because this stuff is still getting pulled off of YouTube, and some of it's censored. But where are these universities to fund more work like what you're doing, Kevin's doing, and others? Still none of that. Not as far as I know.
Not very much. There are a few labs that are trying to do it under the wire, because if they're really publicized, then they might get funded. Now, remember, the NIH funds all of this work. And so, as I'm just gonna be honest with you, as the Trump administration came in, I was really hopeful that I would be in a position to help identify research that could really move us forward in healing autoimmune disease, immune dysregulation, mast cell activation. Many of these are involved in childhood vaccine injury, but also centrally involved in COVID vaccine injury, and in, I mean, even things like metabolic syndrome. And a lot of people are looking at these through a different lens. It really doesn't get at root causes. And so, I would have loved to play a role in funneling resources to the type of research that's really going to move us forward. And so my question with the people coming in with the Trump administration is, have they spent the time to really delve deep into identifying root causes to really actually move us forward? Or are they meaning well, but really don't understand the science? Because I've spent, decades unwrapping this, and people like Ryan Cole have too. So I would love to see him in a position, because he's one of the few people, when you start talking to someone right off, whether they really can follow you with these complex signaling pathways. And it's a lot. And so, and there aren't a lot of people who have studied it because it's unpopular. relating it to vaccine injury, relating it to immune dysregulation, relating it to autoimmunity, and figuring out what's going on. So I'm afraid we're so far behind the power curve that I'm already grieving the loss of life because we're not going to be able to catch up to to the injury and death with our resources because people really don't understand where we're at. So yeah, we are in a small window where if we did something now, it could have a dramatic effect on future events. And that's where the grief, it's like I always kind of ask God, like, you know, again, why didn't you put me in a position to stop this train wreck? Because there are so few of us who really understand what needs to be done in order to do that. And so instead of at the NIH, I'm on this small website going, here's what the root causes are. Here's what the five of you who are joining me can do. I mean, and unfortunately, some of my videos are getting thousands of views. Um, but it's a lot for one person to do with very few resources. I know Dr. Robin Rose, who's done excellent work in this area, is again, you know, functioning with very, very few resources. And we're all, functioning at considerable personal sacrifice in order to try to do this because like I'm not getting paid for this, right? This is their time or whatever. And then in order to try to move this forward, and it's not even the sacrifice that bothers us, it's in the end still feeling like you don't have enough resources to make the impact that you would want. So it's extremely disheartening, but I guess we have to believe that there's some sort of eternal plan here.
Imagine though if you wouldn't have been, you wouldn't have spoken out about any of this. I mean, you think about the people that you've reached in the last 5 years and the millions of views that it's gotten. You still have able to overcome all the suppression and all the shadow banning, and it's still getting out there. So, I mean, I'm always appreciative of the fact that you've come on here and talked to me, and you're making a huge impact. I don't want to get all emotional here. I don't
See,
want.
I don't feel that way. I feel like I'm never making enough of an impact. But I do have to say, whenever anyone reaches out to me and says, I didn't get the vaccine because of you, or you helped me, that is actually what keeps me going because, it feels like a drop in the bucket. I'm really happy that 1,000 people listen to it or 2,000 people listen to something. Um, but in the end, there's millions of people, and I've met some of them. I actually, in response to that post, I can't tell you how many people went on my Instagram and were like, "These people just died of cancer in my family. My husband has pancreatic cancer. My kid has this. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So uh, it's just staggering, really. It's staggering. Like we've never lived in a time like this. Well, okay, maybe like during the Industrial Revolution where there was so much coal that it destroyed everyone's immune system and plague after plague went through. Yeah, so but not in a considerable amount of time.
What are your thoughts on the health administration that Trump is assembling going forward?
I'm concerned that they don't have the scientific knowledge to really, really get at root causes, but there is still a hiring process. So, many times at the top level, you're mostly administrative, right? But you would hope that um, they would understand these issues deeper. I was very concerned. I don't know that much about Jay Bhattacharya. I know he authored the Barrington Declaration. I know he stood against lockdowns, but it sounds like he's an epidemiologist and an economist and about public health. And, I was concerned to see him in an interview talking about how, um, you know, this fear that vaccines cause autism was caused by that one Lancet paper that Andy Wakefield did. I'm like, are you kidding me? We have the molecular mechanisms of injury, and that's what's on my website. So one of the things that's different about my website is on the free pages, I have the COVID vaccine and the childhood vaccines. Um, and I detail not just a page for every childhood injection, I detail the mechanism of injury because if you are injured by aluminum, you could pull out the aluminum and maybe get better, right? And so there's different mechanisms of injury and how to approach recovery is going to depend on what you think is going on. And so but also to, if any healthcare practitioners to go there, to realize that there are very definable mechanisms, injuries with solid scientific support, out there, not one Lancet paper about the MMR. So it's concerning to me that if that is his view of it, or, and even so, maybe he knows more than he's letting on, but if he's not willing to publicly state what he knows, that's equivocation. And maybe these agencies aren't going to accept someone who comes in there with an unequivocal view. And by unequivocal, I mean unequivocal to the truth, not like unable to change their views. My views will change based on the scientific literature, but unequivocal in terms of pandering to the status quo.
This is where my skepticism comes into all this. And I know people are celebrating riding high. I mean, I just had a guy that I run into periodically yesterday, and I'm trying not to get annoyed with all this. Like, I'm like, all right, remember, they don't pay attention like you do. This is like consumes me or whatever. So I try to put that in perspective. And this guy was like, we're all good, man. We're all good. Like, and I'm just like, really? This election's over. It was a fun night, I will say, but it's over. And the next level, I'm going to quote my friend Diana West. She said, the next level of revolution is here. And we're not done. We're just getting started. And
if we're allowed to get started, if we have the resources to get started, or is this just, the same game with slightly different players? And if those people are willing to equivocate so easily, do they have the strength to really reform these agencies?
perfectly said. Well, and do people really have the stones to do what needs to be done? And in terms of healthcare, like, Marty Macri, Dr. Macri, um, I don't know who's qualified for these positions. I can't sit here and be like, oh, that's a great hire, that's a great hire, that's a great hire. But I did see a video with him talking about for pregnant women to get the vaccine. You probably saw that.
No, and I'm just investigating some of these people like you are. And the fact that I don't know who they are is of concern. So you have people like, me and Dr. Ryan Cole and Dr. Jim Thorpe and Dr. Jancy Lindsay and Dr. David Wiseman, who have time and time again donated our own time to go before these boards for the health department, to go before these different things, basically to show up anytime, anywhere, to let people know the truth of the science. And these are very, very people who know the science very deeply and have studied thousands and thousands of these papers and understand what's going on. So to see someone hired who seems to have a very, very low level superficial understanding of what's going on is concerned, because if you can't admit that this vaccine is injuring, you're not going to funnel resources towards recovery. Whether that's, working on autoimmune disease or whatever. So I really do question whether there's going to be any real change. I do believe that the prominence of Robert Kennedy during the election cycle, he has spoken out pretty unequivocally and said boom, boom, boom about vaccine injury, about different things, about different problems with the vaccines. And so I think he gave a greater awareness. So that was really, really critical. But in terms of our health agencies actually doing anything, I do believe that pharmaceutical monies are still very, very tied in. And so I think that many of these appointments, to me, they look like compromise appointments. Not that they're not nice people, they may be well-meaning, but I don't think that they have the knowledge and perhaps the gumption to really make solid, meaningful change. Whether that changes or they bring people in under them, because they have to get Senate confirmation. So could they even get confirmation with somebody who was unequivocal like myself? I don't know the answers to that. So in the end, I actually decided I'm kind of happy here in my house. Like, and talking to the people I want to talk to, like, do I really want to go deal with all these bureaucrats? Trying to get something done, beating my head against the wall. If I was asked, I would feel responsible to go and make as much change as I could. But in the end, I don't know if our current system is adaptable enough to make those changes. I guess we'll find out. I'm happy to help in whatever capacity I can. But the fact that nobody so far has asked me to help, and I feel like people like me, Dr. Ryan Cole, Chancey Lindsay, are some of the people who really understand mechanism, um, really need to be tapped for our expertise. And if we're not being tapped, it brings a lot of things into question. Now, that may be at a later stage, that's going to happen. Um, but the longer you wait, the more the current method of doing things gets more entrenched. So if the new people come in and they accept what was there before, are they really going to go back and then change that if they're not coming in with a new model for how to build things from the get-go?
And is Big Pharma going to allow you to allow, Robert F. Kennedy? I'm still skeptical that he'll get confirmed because you only need, I think it's three Republican senators, three Republicans in the Senate to vote no, and then he won't get in.
Right. And I'm wondering if these choices for NIH, for, Surgeon General, for FDA, are those Robert Kennedy's choices, or are those Trump's choices? Like, or are they again compromise choices, or people that they think they can get confirmed, or like what are we doing here? Because it doesn't feel like a serious effort to me right now. But and I'm not questioning Robert Kennedy's motives. If he's putting someone in, I'm sure there's a strategy behind it, but I'm questioning whether there really is an opportunity here like we hoped. Is it better than maybe who was in there before? I have a question bringing an economist, because the NIH is going to be my baby. I understand signaling, right? I'm a molecular biologist. I'm a signaling scientist. So bringing someone in to run the NIH who really doesn't deeply understand the science, are scientists really going to accept him to run the NIH? I've heard a lot of people say that Fauci's incompetent, this and that and the other. Francis College is incompetent. Absolutely not. They absolutely know the science and they know it to the deepest levels. Now, Fauci may be evil. I'm just going to say it. I don't know what he's got going on because, if you read part of Robert Kennedy's book, The Real Fauci, it's like, ah. Um, so, he's got a lot to stand for God for, and that's on him. But he absolutely understands this deep level science. And I just don't know if you can put someone in to head the NIH who cannot talk to scientists on their own terms. Now, you can put someone in like me and they could say, you're a homeschool mom. Why should I listen to you? But I can give them a lecture to show them and I can actually entertain their questions and do the research and get myself up to speed and actually demonstrate that I speak their language, that I know what work they're doing and I know what relevance it has. So I think someone who goes into the NIH, whatever people go into the NIH, need to be able to demonstrate that. Or, do you have a football player lead a soccer team? They may be great at football, but like it's just, or like say a golf expert lead a soccer team. They might be great at golf, but like, what are they doing in a soccer team?
Well, and even using the comparison of big pharma to the cartels, right? And with the cartels, they're $1 billion industry as well. And would they just willingly surrender without fighting and just shut everything down without some type of blood or something? So big
Right.
pharma, you think they're just going to I'm not posing this question to you, but people think they're just going to lay down and let somebody come in there and say, "All right, we're shutting it off."
Right. And so that's why my efforts are really geared toward the grassroots. That's why I'm on Instagram posting. That's why I'm on Twitter posting, right? It's not so that you see my lovely face every day. Um,
I enjoy seeing it,
it,
Dr. Parks. I enjoy it.
yeah,
You're my favorite scientist in the Midwest.
that's right. I was.
You
Am
still
I
are.
still
Yeah, of
in
course.
the Midwest?
Of course. Well, I don't want to
Not
pull
on the East
favorites.
Coast,
In this
not on the West
in
Coast,
the central,
not
it's
in the
Lynn.
South, not in Hawaii.
Abroad, it's Jessica Rose, Dr. Rose. So you're on my head now before I say any doctor by the first name. Dr. Rose.
There you go. Um, so I would say I think it has to be like cigarettes or whatever. Everybody has to know the problems with this. And that's why, I do have my website as an educational resource where everything is cited. It's got all the scientific papers there, so you can't really easily dismiss my credibility. And the point isn't even that every single mechanism is absolutely spot on because we need a lot more research done. It's saying this is something we need to look more into, and here are some of the seminal papers that we all need to be discussing where to go from here, right? So that's why I did my website, and I want a central location for people to go for health recovery information so they don't have to find that one podcast that's now been censored again from YouTube. We were just talking about that. Like if, posting this video from me would destroy your YouTube channel, right? Or you put it on Rumble where hardly anybody sees it, right? So like what do you do? I post my website like an ad, and I might not even say anything. I won't say the name or anything. And I try to post a link in the comments or something, and it gets one view. I post that, my daughter kicked a ball and it gets like 6,000 views, right? So it's their algorithms are censoring me really heavily, and I can't even figure out why. I almost feel like they've got a person on me that's like, nope, not this one, because I don't use the certain words or anything, and still so highly censored.
I had somebody, I was telling this story yesterday to Dr. Mackis, where a group, they're out of, they were started out of Connecticut, and the New York Attorney General, their nonprofit, that Letitia James was coming after them. And they were shadow banned. So I couldn't even write the name of their organization in an Instagram post. Literally, it's VDARE, VDARE. I couldn't figure it out. I would post, and there would be the video, like a clip of our conversation. I'm like, where the hell's the text? I'm like, did I forget to put the text in?
Uh-huh.
And then I did it again. I took that video down and redid the post. I'm like, what the hell? So I'd had to go in and put a space in between V and dare.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how I didn't realize it was that
Yeah,
sophisticated.
the AI, like they've tagged my website. So anything with reference to my website, even if I just say va-ta.org, or anything, they won't allow it. Like they know what my website is. The AI knows it's a bad website. It's on whatever their AI list is. And so any reference to it whatsoever on Facebook is the worst. Instagram is sketchy, but actually okay. Obviously, X is pretty good and Telegram is fine. But I'm not reaching a lot of people on Telegram, and especially now that we're not in this critical. See, the thing is, during the pandemic phase, um, I instantly had 30,000 followers on Telegram. So, but now everyone's sort of back to normal life, and most of us don't do anything until we go to the doctor and they say, yeah, you've got a tumor in your colon. If you wait that long, it might be too late. So trying to get the word out and all the dangers of these technologies, because they want to change every vaccine on the childhood schedule to this mRNA technology. So, it's, I mean, it's just like we're being bombarded on all sides. And so I just have to get up every day, do the best I can, you know,
I thought it was.
trust that
I thought it was cereal,
God has a
doc.
plan.
I thought it was cereal, Dr. Parks, that was causing all this. Don't we have to take Kellogg's out now? Isn't that the whole thing? The color
Well,
Skittles.
yes. Yeah, because it's all of it. And that's why people think, my website is the Vaccine Injury Teaching Alliance. Um, but people think it's all about, the injury, but it's actually about all chronic illness because there's susceptibility factors. Obviously, sugar is huge. Obviously, snacking all day on sugar, insulin, metabolic disease, toxins, aluminum, like there's so many different contributing factors. And the good news is if you address any of them, your health starts to improve, right? But it's a threshold effect. Once you get enough of them, you detox enough, you reduce inflammation enough, you get above a certain threshold. However, for sure, there are things specific, especially to spike injury and vaccine injury in terms of immune dysregulation that need to be addressed. And everybody's coming from a different place. And so I want sort of a central clearinghouse of information that people can start educating themselves. And I take a lot of the information I have and I clip it into 5, 2, 10-minute videos so that you can read about cholesterol, you can read about seed oils, you can read about because glyphosate. So you can read about each of these things and educate yourself piece by piece because you're not going to make all these changes overnight, especially usually if you were vaccinated, it was because you trusted the medical establishment. And, I know you had your own health journey. And so it's a journey to start
Oh, you
making
remember
changes in
that? You remember that? You remembered my health
yeah, you
journey.
said you had lost a lot of weight and
I was
I
280.
can't, huh?
I was 280 pounds. I'm just impressed you remember that.
So each of us has our own health journey. And I want to have people to have resources because I have a ton of people that say, I went to my doctor and they don't have a clue. Um, and so what questions to ask and what way to go forward. And so I'm trying to provide that to the average person because a lot of these things aren't that deep and technical. It just requires knowledge of, and there's so much, and this is where there is a lot of misinformation on what you can eat and what you can't eat. And I've studied this for 20 years. And so I'm not saying, everything I post is going to be hard and fast. It will never change, but it's based on the best, most accurate science where a lot of the stuff you see in the media is really, it's like 40 years old. Like, someone was saying, well, did I get cancer because I ate red meat? I'm like, no, you didn't get cancer because ate red meat. You got cancer because you have too many toxins or you ate highly processed foods with all sorts of preservatives. Or you got red meat that was actually, from cows, the way they were raised and slaughtered and dipped in chemicals was toxic, right? If you got a cow from your neighbor eating grass across the way, like where we got our cows, that red meat is not causing you cancer. So there's a lot of misinformation, and a lot of it is actually harming people's health. A really great one is hummus. So chickpeas have the highest glyphosate residues of any crop. They're astronomical. So glyphosate destroys your gut bacteria, makes it so you can't absorb minerals, and actually reformats your DNA to cause transgenerational mutations so that your kids will be mutated. And chickpeas, which are, hummus, falafel, all those things that are a very healthy snack food, are just have astronomical, like the highest level of glyphosate ever measured is on these chickpeas. And now we're using them to make, protein rich pastas and stuff like that, and to make gluten free flours. And so chickpeas are used in a lot of health foods. And because of these high glyphosate, they're not really that healthy to begin with, but because of these high glyphosate residues, they're absolutely toxic if they're not organic. And so people don't know this. They are trying to be health conscious and they're eating hummus instead of a bag of chips, right?
Isn't oatmeal too have a lot of glyphosate in it?
Oats have, a lot, but it's relative. So I would say that chickpeas probably have 100 times more glyphosate than oats. So oats are high relative to other things, but chickpeas are astronomical. Lentils are also extremely, extremely high. So I would say all lentils and chickpeas absolutely have to be organic. And I would have most of my oats would be organic as well.
And isn't it?
But interestingly, the more processed the food is, the lower the levels of glyphosate. So in terms of glyphosate, you'd be better to eat a processed frozen pizza, which we know is filled with, preservatives and all kinds of crap, right? But it's lower in glyphosate. So, and it's costly to eat organic.
Isn't the wheat? Isn't that like wheat and chocolate have a high level of glyphosate?
Chocolate, don't tell me that.
No.
I haven't seen anything suggesting chocolate has a high level of glyphosate.
Well,
Chocolate has magnesium, so it can be considered a health food.
I thought the cocoa. Isn't the cocoa? Isn't there a lot of glyphosate in cocoa? I could be wrong about this, but I feel like I
I
heard
don't
that.
know why they would spray a herbicide on cocoa, but I've never looked into it. I've never seen any data suggesting that chocolate has high levels of glyphosate. So I'll have to be something I look into. Um, where are we? But if you have something that has chocolate with oats in it, then, the oats are gonna make it look high.
Well,
So I lost you. There was something else you were saying besides the chocolate.
oh, I
What
said
was the,
well with wheat. In terms of wheat, like a wheat beer or sourdough breads.
so sourdough will help break down some of the glyphosate, So I mean, made my own organic sourdough bread for years, which breaks down the gluten, so it makes it less harsh on the digestive system. And it also liberates a lot of B vitamins and things like that. And so that's like with meat, beef and lamb and milk are excellent sources of B vitamins and zinc, especially like B12, which are not really gotten from a vegan diet. And so, a lot of people are like, no, red meat is the devil. That's all a marketing campaign. People have been eating beef for hundreds and thousands of years without problems. Now, I'm not saying that you should be eating beef all day, every day, like a, carnivore diet, but I'm saying it's not the devil that it's been made out to be. It can be a little bit hard for your digestion to break down, but if you make a pot roast and stew it all day, It's got collagen, it has B vitamins, especially B12, zinc, a lot of really, really great nutrients that a lot of us aren't getting if we don't eat beef. Now, if you buy a beef stick that's full of garbage, then that's different.
Well, and it's amazing to me is, when I was a kid, I don't remember hearing about other kids having autoimmune disorders. I just don't remember that. I mean, I was born in 78, so I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, graduated high school in 96. And now, I mean, I feel like everybody knows somebody who has an autoimmune disorder.
And that's one of the things, like I have a lecture on my website about that, about what's causing that autoimmune disorder. And it's hyperinflammation. I believe it's hyperinflammation of the immune system. And toxins are one of the things, vaccines, many different things that are causing hyperinflammation of our immune system. And obviously it's something that the people who are genetically susceptible to got first, but now it's pretty much almost everybody. And if you are not actively taking control of your health, you're probably next. I mean, it's one of those things that I think at this point, because of the onslaught of different things, whether it's the spike protein or whatever they're spraying in the air, the aluminum, whatever it is, that we are all going to end up with, because we're all hyperinflammatory, our immune systems are all being chronically activated. And so if we're not doing something to reduce that activation, to reset our immune response, I think that we're all on the same trajectory. And that's why I wanted to, get into the NIH and really put some resources to dealing with this so that we can actually, have the most targeted treatments that are possible in terms of knowing how best to modulate that immune response.
Going back for a second, one last question I have for you. In terms of, these self-replicating mRNAs, did they know that when they designed it, that it would have this type of impact? In your guessing or estimation?
So like, this is why it's not surprising to me that Moderna, who Fauci had an investment in, Pfizer also can be read backwards and make some sort of preogenic protein. And it probably is read backwards, where they, Moderna did a lot of checks and balances on their technology to make sure it was safer. Now, do I consider it safe? No, I don't really consider it safe, but it was a whole lot safer than Pfizer's technology. Pfizer did not do these checks and balances. That is their job, and we don't have any regulatory agencies because it was not considered experimental gene therapy. They lied basically and slid it through as a vaccine. It should have had 10 years of testing, and the scientists know this. They know this technology. They absolutely should have known, but the people who are the heads of the company may not understand all of this complex science. And that's one of the reasons I've continued to speak out, is because we absolutely have to make the dangers of this technology known to the average person, because like Scott Gottlieb, which is head of the FDA, he doesn't understand this kind of technology. He, hand waved through some gene therapy. He's a medical doctor. He's never been trained in this, and they've disbanded all of the different committees who are supposed to provide regulatory oversight. So the people developing this technology absolutely should know. They absolutely should know. But like the people who are in the labs developing the technology, and the person who's running the company, who then makes an agreement with the U.S. government to provide the vaccines or whatever it is, that's a different story. And when you have an incentive to overlook potential problems, they get overlooked. And the lack of liability. Remember, because of the emergency, this is why they destroyed hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. Because of the emergency use authorization, the government had no liability. And that's the problem with the childhood vaccines. When you have no liability, what incentive do you have to make sure that your product is safe as it can be? Right? This technology is inherently unsafe, but it's not even close to being as safe as it could be.
And you still, to this day, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. I don't know if the CVSs and the Walgreens have it.
No, some of the safest medications on the planet with a very proven history, broadly antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, antiparasitic, right? Anti-inflammatory. Hydroxychloroquine is used as an HIV drug overseas. It actually helps with metabolic disorder, especially like in people like of African descent who are prone to metabolic disorder. So it can reduce comorbidities. Um, all of this has been shown, scientifically validated, and you still can't get either of these. It should be in everybody's medical cabinet.
It's not expensive either. It's not like it's a drug that costs you thousands of dollars.
Like $1 a pill. If some of the places that are charging have to charge more because it's hard for them to get, right? So, but it shouldn't be hard to get. And this is where, pressure needs to be put because hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine is one of the only medications shown to inhibit Ebola, to prevent animals from dying of Ebola. So, and we've had those Ebola scares in the past. So it's very frustrating to watch things go back to normal, and there's only a few of us who are still out there pressing forward. Everybody else is exhausted, and understandably so. And so the question is, what happens when the next thing hits, or when just this, COVID gut plasmid causes havoc with everybody's health?
How do you detach from all this personally? Because it's heavy.
Honestly, I don't know. Okay, so I don't really ever stop thinking about it, but I honestly think whenever you do something positive, it is less of a burden. So there are times when things feel very heavy, but every day I just get up and say, what do you want to create today? I do, my connection with God is very, very strong. It's something that's a huge priority in my life to let go of my thinking and just sort of meditate, connect to God, to be that source of energy, of motivation, of creativity. But um, I think that fortunately, I do a lot of different things. Like I do a podcast with you, and then I work on my website. And so each day I just try to take a step forward in a positive direction. I actually find this fascinating. Um, for me, in certain ways, it's very fulfilling because I feel like I can use my strengths, my knowledge, my competence in a way that is absolutely relevant. When Kevin McKernan's work came out and I immediately printed off his paper and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm looking at a plasmid map. This is my field. Like I never thought I would go on X and be like, this plasmid map shows, right? Like, and of course I try to make it in layman's terms, but I'm looking at the restriction sites and looking at the SV40, the origin of replication, and I'm thinking, I never thought molecular biology would ever be mainstream like this. And so the fact that what I know is extremely relevant and extremely needed, um, that part is extremely satisfying and fulfilling. Of course, the converse side is that I understand, it's like I understand what's happening. I understand the mass depopulation that's happening where other people can turn a blind eye to it. But there's people who know what's happening and don't feel that they have the skills to make a difference, or maybe they just, I don't know, like it doesn't take any particular skill. Like I asked one guy, I said, how are you qualified to be reading all these medical papers and coming up with this? He's like, I'm not, I just started doing it. Just like anything else, you learn by doing. So other people have stepped forward. So I think any of us who step forward to do something positive, I feel like we are building a new future. And like when Rome fell, do I feel like civilization is falling? I actually do. I feel like civilization is falling, and
Me too.
the the decline of our health is going to contribute significantly to that. One, because so many people have to be a caretaker. And so how do you build anything when no one can barely do their job and take care of the people at home that they love? So I believe our civilization is collapsing. But I think something new will grow out of that, right? Even after a forest fire, it doesn't take very long before you see green shoots of grass shooting up. And so it's extremely exciting to me to potentially be that green shoot of grass and to decide what a new civilization or society or whatever is going to look like. And so I think that that's what many of us have in common, and where we build these networks of and it's extremely uncertain. There's days I'm like, God, can't you just show me like where I'm going? And I'm like, well, do you have something to do? Do you have something to do today? Do you know what you're doing today? Absolutely, I have plenty to do to keep me busy for quite some time. Well, I'll do that and let God show you the next step. I would 5 years ago, I would have never imagined being where I'm at now. So I don't know what the future holds. We don't know what kind of world events are going to happen. Even in terms of Trump and Bobby Kennedy getting in, we didn't know that was going to happen. So uh, I think that just working at the grassroots and helping people to solve their own problems step by step and trusting that, I mean, how many people did Jesus affect in his lifetime? Not very many personally, but he made a huge impact on history. So we don't know the overall impact we're going to have, and it's hugely exciting. Like when like you're talking about your cards of all of these different cool people, all the cool kids, to know people who are absolutely warriors making a difference in history. It's You're living at a very exciting time, and I think that it can be very uncertain. It can cause a lot of grief, but it also allows you to express yourself at the highest level of your being because it demands so much of us. So it's like, crises create, I don't want to say create heroes because it was already inside of them, but it pulls it out of people who would become the warriors. So I feel like I am becoming the person I was always meant to be. Of course, I still feel the burden of grief for the circumstances that has caused that.
This is a little side note, I'm curious. Was like science interpreting like all the stuff like Kevin's work? Was that something just came really even just easy to you as a kid? Like you just could understand these things.
Yeah, I
You
think
can't teach
so.
that, right?
I
You
mean,
can't teach.
I was a teacher, so breaking things down in layman's terms is, I think, always been a gift of mine, and that's why I went into teaching. And of course, it gets honed more and more because this is really hard stuff to break down. And I think that's why I became popular because people are like, "Hey, I get what she's saying," right? But I remember I actually I was in drama and dance. I wanted to be a dancer,
I remember that.
and
I remember that.
yeah, so I may have told this story. And so we were doing a one act play and we were always out of school, and those were great days, right? And so I came back to biology class, which I was barely ever in. And I asked one of my neighbors, what are we doing? And they're like, hey, we're doing DNA and RNA and stuff, genetics. And I said, didn't we already take a test on that? She's like, yeah, we did. And everybody failed it. So we're doing the entire unit over again. Well, I had been so busy, I had done little more than like read the chapter and taken the test. And as I'm asking this, the teacher comes with my test, which I've been gone for like a week, and gives me my test back. And I got like 92 or something on it. And they were like, maybe you should read this book and this book or whatever. And so that actually got me actually thinking about, well, maybe this is something I'm good at and is going to pay the bills a lot better than dance or acting. And so that's part of the decision that I made to go into molecular biology in college and biochemistry. So I would say, yeah, I was definitely one of the mediocre kids in my class, not definitely one of the smartest people. But with anything, your perseverance determines your level of understanding. So, even though there were people with better brains than I was, eventually I did go on to graduate school and I've continued learning and honing this for, some number of years.
But your level of interest is what also like these books. If you'd have been bored with it, you probably wouldn't have finished them. But you were engaged enough that you were.
Yeah, I didn't read the books at the time. So honestly, I think I didn't really engage until after I got out of graduate school, where I started thinking about some of the things I'd learned. I actually studied quantum mechanics, quantum physics while I was in graduate school, not unofficially, informally. That's what I would read at night. What is the basis of our reality? How is matter created? Like, I was not smart enough to do the math to go into that, but I was still really interested in it. But when I got out, I was like, vitamin D is really interesting. The fact that we have an interferon receptor that, like, interferon that mediates an antiviral response is really interesting. So I started, like, kind of looking into these things, looking into nutrition and nutrition science after I got out. And again, like, how much we know is really fueled by our questions. And then when I found PubMed was online, I have a lot of questions. And the more I learn, the more questions I have. And so what people would find when they come on Vita, which they were usually unprepared for, is usually they give presentations to lay people. And the lay people will be like, wow, wow. And I'm here with like 14 questions and this. And what about this? And they're like, no one's ever asked me that before. And so I have a lot of questions, and that fuels learning things. Yeah, if you don't have questions, reading a lot of the books that I book read are going to seem really dry to you because you're not going to really understand what you're looking for, what you're getting. So, but I would say being a mom brings up a lot of questions. I have children's health, I think, and that's why this movement is largely fueled by moms.
What you just said, how much we know is fueled by questions. That should be merch for your website right there. That's a great saying.
I'll have to remember that because I was just thinking about that the other day of why I have this insatiable, like how I get through these books because I'm like, I have these questions. Is this book going to answer it? And if not, what book will? And so, like, I'm reading Jason Fung, The Diabetes Code, which is a great book. It's pretty simple and straightforward for me. But any leads that I can get to answer particular questions, I'm reading it like it's a freaking novel. I'm like, oh yeah, that's so interesting. And what paper was that? I need to look up that paper. I got to show you because I literally have.
While you're doing that, while you're looking at that right now, I'm going to put that on X and tag you because that is, and quote it, because that is such a good, that is so true just in life. How much we know is fueled by questions. That's what you said, right?
Yeah, by which questions we ask. And that's why I'm a little bit worried about some of the picks because I don't know if they have the questions. So I don't know if you can see this, but here I am in his book, like highlighting all these papers, and then I went right on the internet and pulled all these papers up to look for answers to my questions. And so that's the kind of research I do. And then when I get, like, usually I'll start reading the papers, which will fuel another question, which will make me go to another paper, and I'll lose sight of the initial question that I was asking. Crazy. But I learn a lot,
That that
and
uh,
it's super fun.
that's just such a great saying. Literally, when we get done, I'm going to put that on X and tag you as a quote because
Thank you.
that is so spot on.
So what was the quote again? Because now I'm going to write it down.
Well, I have to go. I thought it was how much. Well, I'll
Yeah.
send you the post. Um,
Okay.
that way you have it. But didn't you say how much we know is fueled by which questions we ask?
Yeah. hmm Yeah.
You can
Or
put
how
that.
much we ask questions.
Well, which one you want? Do you want all of them? Which quote? Which quote? I
I
like
don't
how much
know.
how much
How
we
much?
know. How much we know is fueled by which questions we ask. But you can even take
I
the
would
which
say
out,
by how
right?
many questions we ask, or how many questions we seek answers to.
How many questions we? I like how many questions we ask
Yeah. How
because
many questions we ask is
because it's
simpler.
it's
By
so
how many
broader in
questions we ask.
general and it can apply to so many different things.
Yeah.
There's your quote. There you go. You got to put that on your website with a quote.
I might, because I was thinking about how important that is the other day. Like, what makes me different from people is like I have all these questions. You like I have hundreds of questions that I want answers to, and on any given day, I'm like, what am I going to do today? Am I going to do what I need to do? Am I going to look for the answer to this question? Because that's actually the most fun. Actually, is looking for answers to questions.
And how do we truly learn, right? When we come up with questions on our own, it's not limited to one certain area. When we come up with questions
No,
on our own and we seek out these answers, and sometimes we have to get different responses to formulate the best we can. But that's how we gain our knowledge. That's really good.
right. And the thing is it's relevant. So the reason why kids don't learn is you give them all this information and it has no relevance to them. And so I was always a really popular biology teacher because I made it really relevant and people understood how it related to their life. And it's because, you give someone a question and then you give them the answer to it, right? The reason like people might have an answer and they don't see it because they weren't asking the question. So the information is irrelevant to them. So yeah, I realized I'm super curious, and I think moms started asking questions and about their children's health, and they were sharing scientific papers. And how do these moms, without any technical background, read these scientific papers? Because they needed answers to their questions, and they were the ones that were coming to me with scientific papers saying, "I read this, and I think this is what it's saying. Is that correct?" You know. And so, I mean, I was just like, I've met my people.
Do you think the education system can be reformed? The public education system?
I think everything has to be reformed from the person up. I think when we change, the systems that are instituted will change. So, I mean, yeah, a few people can maybe make some change, but really, like it's like organic food. It used to be very, very sparse, but the more people that demanded it, it's kind of, almost normal most places now, right? So I think the more people our mindset collectively determines the society that we create. So ideas are very powerful, and that's one of the reasons I continue speaking publicly, even on small podcasts or whatever, is because we create with our ideas, and words are what we use to share ideas. And the more people, I think imposing like one version of reality, like the Republican version or the Christian conservative version or whatever version it is not really as powerful as people asking questions and sharing visions that are important to them. And when people are lit on fire for a vision that inspires them and enough people, it will almost create itself because you will easily find people to work with to create your vision. So one person trying to overhaul something is kind of a losing battle. But when we spark an idea, that's when society changes. It doesn't often change as fast as we want it to. But once an idea catches fire, the change is inevitable.
Where can people find you, Dr. Parks?
So I'm epigenetic healing at epigenetic healing on Instagram. I know I was trying to be stealth and it's just hard to do. I'm at Dr. C Parks 1 on Twitter, at Dr. C Parks 1 on Twitter. I'm just Christina Parks on Facebook, and I don't know, on Telegram. Not many people follow me on Telegram, but I'm on Telegram as well, Dr. Christina Parks.
I think the last time we spoke, well, you had Facebook because that's how I connected with you, and Telegram. Oh, I think you had Instagram. You didn't have X though.
No, I got on X quite late, but things when something goes viral, it goes so viral on X. So it's a good place to go viral. So yeah, I was able to, and I worked for America's Frontline Doctors, and they put out a really great video that they edited with me. I don't know if you saw that one, um, where they were, I don't know, I think it had Alex Jones and a tinfoil hat in it, but they edited it and put all this other different stuff in it, and it went super, super viral. It was really great. Um, so yeah, but actually I hadn't been active on Twitter for quite some time, but when I really need to talk about the specifics of something, obviously X is the best place to do it because it's the least censored. And it gets the most traction where Telegram, doesn't get a lot of traction.
And Instagram for what I it was solely what I was using, and when I started all this, and then it was Lee Mignon that suggested I get a Twitter because it wasn't X yet, and said I'll reshare because she didn't have Instagram. And man, once I created that account, it was like a whole new lane to connect with people on X.
Yeah, I don't really have time to manage X because it's so in real time, right? Where Instagram, you put the post and then people see it over the course of the day. On X, if like you miss that 5 minute window, like nobody cares. I don't know. Um, but Instagram has been really great for me. I work with Brother Riza Islam, and a lot of his followers, um, are Black. And so to get to the Black population in America, that has been a great venue. So I have a lot of people that are following me on Instagram to get this information into the minds of people who maybe not otherwise may not know who I was. So,
But I think in your case, though, any platform you're going to be on in terms of communicating posts and whatnot, I think you'd be successful because people, A, they like you. B, you bring a lot of value with the information that you put out there. And so whether it been Instagram or Facebook or X, you're going to, I mean, X, you already have a big following and you haven't even been on there that long.
right, right. And I haven't been posting a lot. And my last post got, and I find if it's something I find when I explain this technology, that's when I get the most hits. Because there's just not a lot of people who can explain it in the way, like I was looking at Kevin McKernan's post, and some of his get a lot of traction, but I think for the average layperson, it's too technical. Um, and so it doesn't get like, the interview that this is from was an amazing interview. I watched the whole thing. It's like an hour and 45 minutes, worth every minute of it, and it only had like 700 views. And I'm like, this is an amazing interview, but like the average person, doesn't know if they can understand it, and whatever. So it needs to be short, it needs to be relevant, and it needs to be in understandable terms, and it needs to be something that obviously that I have a niche, right? Like not everybody can do that. So, if I do a post on vitamin C, it gets some traction, but, not as much on as experimental gene therapy. So,
Dr. Parks, as always, good to see you. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for everything that, all the information you're putting to get the truth out. And I look forward to more conversations ahead.
all right. Thanks so much, Michael.
Mic drop.